Welcome to the Watcher's Chair. This is a space for observation, not reaction. Here, we examine what actually can happen, the behaviors, the patterns, and the dynamics. This isn't about accusations or counter narratives. It's about understanding how trauma bonds form, how sincerity can be used as leverage, and how certainty is often mistaken for truth. Nothing here is meant to persuade or provoke. The chair doesn't argue, it doesn't chase explanations, it simply witnesses. If something you hear feels familiar, that isn't coincidence. It means you're recognizing a pattern. The sentence. This is not a story about abuse or manipulation. It is a story about how meaning forms. It begins with something ordinary, a neutral statement about time, limits, or capacity. Nothing cruel is said, nothing personal is intended. But language does not arrive alone. It lands inside a nervous system that already carries memory, stress, and history. Because of that, the sentence is not received only as information. It is interpreted through past experience. The words themselves do not change, but the meaning assigned to them does. Once that happens, everything that follows begins to move in a different direction. How meaning forms. Meaning does not come from words alone. It comes from what the body recognizes before the mind has time to evaluate. When a sentence is heard, the nervous system reacts first and asks a simple question: does this feel familiar? If the answer is yes, memory enters the moment, not as a clear story, but as physical sensation such as tension, urgency, or alarm. At that point, the sentence is no longer processed as neutral information. It becomes interpreted as a signal. What matters then is not what was said, but what the listener has felt before. This is why two people can hear the same words and walk away with completely different realities. One remains in the present moment. The other is already responding to the past. When that shift occurs, clarity stops feeling neutral and begins to feel threatening. When repair makes it worse. Once meaning has shifted, attempts to repair often fail. Clarifying begins to sound like defending. Defending begins to sound like control. Control is then interpreted as intent. At this stage, context feels like an excuse, and calmness feels calculated. Even patience can appear suspicious. The conversation is no longer about understanding what was meant. It becomes about proving what the words are believed to reveal. When intent has been rewritten, explanation no longer helps. Communication stops functioning as a bridge and starts being treated as evidence. That is the moment when repair no longer restores safety and instead accelerates breakdown. How narratives lock. When fear meets certainty, the story stops changing. Once a meaning feels confirmed, new information is no longer evaluated, it is filtered. At that point, outside validation matters more than dialogue. Authority tools or third parties can harden a belief instead of clarifying it. What feels like support reinforces the interpretation that already exists. From there, the narrative becomes fixed. Any attempt to re-explain is seen as further proof. Silence is treated as guilt. Presence feels intrusive. Distance feels justified. This is how people lose each other, because meaning hardened before understanding had a chance to catch up. This is where we pause, not to decide who was right, but to understand what actually happened. What you do with that understanding is yours. The watcher's chair doesn't ask for agreement. It exists, so patterns can be seen, named, and left behind. We'll continue next time.